Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this September 3rd, 2014 edition of Nightcast. A father and son storm-chasing team have caught the moment. One of them was struck by lightning on camera. Danny Murphy from Iowa was hit in the leg, leaving him hospitalized, while his son Derek Murphy had a lucky escape. This is our opening story tonight, friends.
I don't remember even thunder. I don't remember flash. I just remember getting up 15 minutes later. I do remember shortly afterwards that I was paralyzed for a while. I was worried about that.
I felt this weird feeling, just like something was going to happen, and you get that hair standing on the back of your neck. But it was just so sudden that you didn't have any time to react. Boom. And it struck, and the 2 seconds, I just went blank. I just went black. I couldn't remember anything for about 2 seconds. And I woke up as I was flying back about 3-4 feet against the car.
And friends, good idea to pray for protection before you leave the house. One person has been killed and 4 people injured when a pedestrian overpass collapsed in Istanbul, Turkey. The incident happened after a dumper truck mechanism was mistakenly activated, hitting a support pillar. And we've got video on that, but it looks like my video player is hanging up tonight, friends. Here we go. Now, there's no commentary with this video, so I'll just tell you again that 1 person was killed, 4 people injured when this pedestrian overpass collapsed in Istanbul, Turkey. It happened again after a dumpster truck mechanism was mistakenly activated, hitting a support pillar on the overpass. Now, friends, this leads to our next story from an archive. I wanted to share this with you since this was in the news today about this overpass collapsing. A new rail tunnel underneath the Bosphorus Strait in Turkey will link the Asian and European shores of Istanbul. This Istanbul is where this overpass collapsed. Officials say now this video I'm about to show you is from our archive from a year ago, when officials were saying that the $4 billion tunnel will relieve pressure on the 2 existing city bridges and will ease traffic congestion and pollution. In this archive video, the BBC's James Reynolds reports from Istanbul, something I believe we should be aware of with the events that are about to happen around the world.
Istanbul sits across Europe and Asia. Now, for the first time, a tunnel will connect the 2 continents. Engineers began work in 2004. They dug more than 60 meters underground. But building anything in such an ancient city is never straightforward. Engineers had to stop work when they came across archaeological ruins from the Byzantine era. They've also had to make sure that the tunnel can withstand a strong earthquake.
Meydana gelebilecek 7,5 magnetik.
The tunnel can withstand a 7.5 magnitude earthquake. This means that if you found yourself at the epicenter of an earthquake of that magnitude, there would be major damage to the surface. But here, we would only feel a little shake.
Now, after long delays, the work is finished.
Okay, friends, I wanted you to be aware that they have that tunnel finished as of last year. between Asia and Europe through Istanbul. They also have a big new rail system that Erdogan had a big part in helping develop. But I want to go now to stories out of Europe. You know, last night Obama took off for Europe, and he has paid tribute to American journalist Steven Sotloff while he was over there, overseas. You know, Steven Sotloff, from the news yesterday, was beheaded by Islamic State militants, and President Obama said the U.S. would not be intimidated.
I want to say that today the prayers of the American people are with the family of a devoted and courageous journalist, Steven Sotloff. Overnight, our government determined that tragically Steven was taken from us in a horrific act of violence. We cannot even begin to imagine the agony that everyone who loves Steven is feeling right now, especially his mother, his father, and his younger sister. So today our country grieves with them. Like Jim Foley before him, Steve's life stood in sharp contrast to those who murdered him so brutally. They make the absurd claim that they kill in the name of religion, but it was Steven, his friends say, who deeply loved the Islamic world. His killers try to claim that they defend the oppressed, but it was Steven who traveled across the Middle East, risking his life to tell the story of Muslim men and women demanding justice and dignity. Whatever these murderers think they'll achieve by killing innocent Americans like Steven, they have already failed. They failed because, like people around the world, Americans are repulsed by their barbarism. We will not be intimidated. Their horrific acts only unite us as a country and stiffen our resolve to take the fight against these terrorists. And those who make the mistake of harming Americans will learn that we will not forget, and that our reach is long, and that justice will be served.
Okay, friends, so you heard the words of President Obama there, and he made several addresses in several different places while he's been away in Europe, in that sudden flight to there, leaving last night. But he was talking about Steven Sotloff. Let me just recap or summarize for those that or maybe watching this from an archive sometime later or may not have heard. Mr. Sotloff, 31 years old, was abducted in northern Syria in August last year, 2013. And in this video, you heard Mr. Obama describe him as a devoted and courageous journalist. Now, in another address elsewhere in Europe, U.S. President Obama shows support for Baltic states. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin has said he is hoping for a peace deal between Ukraine and pro-Russian rebels by this coming Friday. Meanwhile, the U.S. President has urged members of the Nato alliance to send what he calls an unmistakable message backing Ukraine.
President Obama being greeted in Estonia, just over 100 miles from the Russian border. Hanging over his visit, the fighting in Ukraine, with the president following closely conflicting reports of a ceasefire plan. But the American president was on a mission to reassure the Baltic states, increasingly wary of Russia and its actions in Ukraine. Estonia is a former Soviet republic. 25% of the people here are ethnic Russians, and President Putin has his admirers here.
Putin is very clever. In Russia, we haven't had this kind of leader for a long time.
I like him as a person and his politics.
He is a very honourable person and a smart politician.
President Obama, in a major speech in Tallinn, gave this guarantee to the Baltic states.
So if, in such a moment, you ever ask again who will come to help, you'll know the answer. The NATO alliance, including the armed forces of the United States of America right here, present now.
Then the president turned to Russia's actions in Ukraine.
It is a brazen assault on the territorial integrity of Ukraine, a sovereign and independent European nation. It challenges that most basic of principles of our international system, that borders cannot be redrawn at the barrel of a gun.
In Ukraine, there has been further shelling around the town of Donetsk. During the day, there were reports that President Poroshenko of Ukraine and President Putin had agreed on a plan that might just lead to a ceasefire, with the possibility of the two sides launching a peace process later this week. Elsewhere in Europe, there is great uncertainty as to what these various statements coming out of Kiev and Moscow amount to. And one further indication tonight of the pressure leaders are under. The French have decided to suspend delivery of 2 helicopter carriers to Russia, something they had been adamant they wouldn't do. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Tallinn.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hewitt. Very good report Gavin Hewitt just gave there, friends, and showing some of the confusion that all this is leading to. And President Obama's comments here came as he visited Estonia today to try to reassure the Baltic states following recent events in Ukraine and ahead of a NATO summit in Wales. And you know, a lot of people have been saying NATO should have acted weeks and months ago. You know, we're a little bit behind, and so there's a lot of words. Gavin Hewitt put it well as he said there's confusion. And friends, one of the elements before major world war is to have confusion and frustration. Those are the conditions before round 1 of World War. Those were the conditions before round 2 of World War. And we're now, as we've often repeated the words of Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, we are in a recess between rounds 2 and rounds 3 of World War. And what can help kick off World War is a lot of frustration and confusion. Again, it can cause the United Europe to want to put together its own military if they see NATO not pulling it off. So the President Obama, had a lot of words today. Even the Vice President today had some rather poignant words where he said, "We will chase the Islamic State to the gates of hell." Now, those were the words of Vice President Biden today. But what kind of effect is this having now in Russia, now that there's talks of maybe some kind of a peace workout by Friday? Well, in this next story, you'll see how Russian shares and the value of the ruble surged ahead today after the announcement of a permanent ceasefire in eastern Ukraine. It came after the president of Ukraine said he had reached a deal with President Putin of Russia. But the initial optimism was spoiled by an announcement from the Kremlin that it had not entered into such an agreement. So far, there has been no indication that the forces in eastern Ukraine have stopped fighting, as you'll see and hear in this video report with Jeremy Howell.
Just as the conflict in eastern Ukraine and Western sanctions caused financial markets in Moscow to tumble over the summer, the announcement from Ukraine's president of a ceasefire deal caused an immediate rally. Shares on the MySex exchange rose by nearly 3% in early morning trading. The value of the ruble, which had recently been plunging against the dollar, rose by 1.3%. But the optimism of the markets in Moscow is mixed with caution. The Kremlin has announced it didn't agree a ceasefire with Ukraine, but had only agreed on what it called steps towards peace. And there's no indication so far that the pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine have in fact lain down their arms. Financial analysts say that because of the uncertainty around the ceasefire announcement, Russian financial markets are unlikely to rally much further. Jeremy Howell, BBC News.
Okay, friends, as we told you, President Obama is in Europe ahead of the NATO summit. There are concerns that Russia may attempt to exact influence and even possibly foment unrest in other former Soviet states. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, but Estonia, one of the Baltic states, is, and Obama has pledged that NATO will defend it from any Russian interference. Chris Morris reports from the Estonia-Russia border, where people are watching the visit closely.
Touchdown in Tallinn. President Obama in Estonia, a NATO member state that was once ruled from Moscow as part of the Soviet Union. The symbolism is pretty clear, and all because Russian aggression in Ukraine has made the three Baltic states wonder who's next. 2 hours to the east, this is Narva, and the river forms the border between Russia over there and Estonia over here. In fact, we're closer to St. Petersburg than we are to Tallinn, and about 90% of this town's population are ethnic Russian. And pretty much everyone is keeping an eye on the visit of President Obama, and in particular, on what's happening in Ukraine.
You do think about that, because you cannot not think about that when you hear things and watch things. But I don't think we worry much yet. There is nothing to worry about. But you know, it's a good sign that Obama is coming here. Because, well, I don't know how the rest of the world is seeing us, but we've always been a part of the West.
Back in 1993, not long after Estonian independence from the Soviet Union, they had a referendum here about joining Russia. It was approved before being struck down by the Estonian courts as unconstitutional. And one of the most enthusiastic backers on the Russian side for this process was a former KGB colonel from St. Petersburg named Vladimir Putin. Plenty of people remember those times, but the consensus here is that things have changed.
Where will we go to Russia? No one is waiting for us over there. My children and grandchildren are here already, so the people who wanted to leave and go, they left already, and the ones who stayed here, they stayed here, so they feel okay, quite okay over here.
It's certainly hard to imagine a much more peaceful scene than this, but the political concern is not so much about what people here are thinking as about what mischief they might be planning in Moscow. And that's why the President of the United States has come to Estonia, to remind everyone that this is part of NATO now, part of an alliance committed to mutual defence. Chris Morris, BBC News, on the Estonian-Russian border.
Friends, we have more related to NATO and what's going on over in many areas and parts of the world with cities that I bet a lot of you probably have as much trouble trying to pronounce as I do. NATO has unveiled new plans for closer relations with Georgia. No problem with Georgia. The relationship has long been opposed by neighboring Russia, with Georgia already contributing to NATO-led operations and cooperating with allies and partner countries. Many Georgians sympathize with Ukraine in its fight against pro-Russian separatists in the east. Many are reminded of the events which led to Georgia's breakaway regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and the war it sparked between Russia and Georgia in 2008. From Tbilisi, Ryan Dmitry reports.
There is little love for Vladimir Putin in Georgia. Many here believe that they share with Ukraine the same struggle against Russia. Some activists have painted Ukrainian national colors over the Soviet hammer and sickle.
It's not conflict between Russia and Ukraine. It is the new version of Cold War. A few years ago, Georgia was in this position, and today is Ukraine. And so it is. We can understand what is this.
Georgia fought a brief war with Russia in 2008 over its breakaway region of South Ossetia. Now both South Ossetia and Georgia's another breakaway territory of Abkhazia are supported financially and militarily by Moscow.
Georgia's new government has been trying to reduce tensions and re-establish economic ties with Russia. Trade embargoes have been lifted by the Kremlin. But at the same time, the leadership here has been trying to bolster its relationship with the West.
In June, Georgia signed a trade and association agreement with the EU, but its long-standing ambition has been NATO membership. Georgia has been the largest non-NATO contributor to the ISAF mission in Afghanistan. This week in Wales, NATO will offer Georgia a new package, including the establishment of a military training centre. That would be welcome here, but it risks causing friction once again with Moscow. Rehan Dimitri, BBC News, Tbilisi.
Friends, I've got a story coming up next that unfortunately I don't have video for it, and sometimes, friends, some of the stories that are important to cover are not always covered in video, unfortunately. And some of the things that we should, one of the most important stories today, with one of the most important points in it, comes out of this written report by Mohamed Hashim for BBC Monitoring. I'm going to read that to you. Despite the focus on Western jihadists, most foreign militants in Syria are Arabs. These Western fighters have had a high media profile, especially since the beheading of 2 U.S. journalists by a suspected British jihadist. Yet recent studies show that most foreign militants in Syria and Iraq are Arabs. The New York-based Sufan Group and the London-based International Center for the Study of Radicalization suggest that the total number of foreign fighters in Syria at present is between 11,000 and 12,000, with only about 3,000 of them from the West. Of the remainder, Tunisians make up the largest group, estimated at about 3,000, followed by those from Saudi Arabia, about 2,500, and Morocco, 1,500. Arab media stress that the true figures could be much higher than these estimates. Tunisian media sources, quoting a CNN and a PEW report, point to the fact that their country has become the main incubator of terrorist fighting in Syria. Several Tunisian soldiers have been killed by Islamist militants in recent months. Since the overthrow of Tunisian President Ben Ali in 2011, the country has seen a low-level insurgency involving Islamist militants. Several opposition politicians have been assassinated, and dozens of militants and soldiers have been killed. Tunisia has also suffered from the chaos in neighboring Libya and the presence of militants there. According to a report attributed to the Syrian military, almost 54,000 foreign combatants from 87 different countries have come to the country since the start of the civil war. Thousands of them are said to have been killed. The first report, published by Tunisian daily newspaper and widely circulated in the Arabic media, says the study was compiled by an unnamed Syrian military research center. And friends, one of the most significant things in this story is the caption that was under this picture. So I'm going to bring full screen while I look through my notes and find you the caption underneath that picture, because it mentions Jerusalem. And in a most interesting way. Oh, that may be. I only typed that caption in the photograph. I typed that caption as part of the photograph name. Okay, before we're finished tonight, friends, somehow I'm going to see if I can find a way to get you that caption, because what it says is, even though they fight in Syria, their focus is on Jerusalem. And this is a story from today's news, and when I saw this, I said, hey, wait a minute. You know, there is a scripture in the Bible that talks about, you know, watching for a certain event, and when armies surround Jerusalem, then we're to know that's the certain timing for a certain departure. And here we've got these people captioned under this picture that says something to the effect that though we fight in Syria, our focus, and it says a little more than this, but it did say our focus is on Jerusalem. And of course, in that display that they're holding, you can see the Dome of the Rock there, which is in Jerusalem. So if these Islamic militant fighters, they've got their focus on Jerusalem, well, that may be a signal that when they get involved over there, that it won't be long before we will see armies surrounding Jerusalem. Now, friends, you know, I often pray and ask God to guide and lead me in this program. I had a kind of a rushed day today, and I'm realizing as I'm speaking to you now, I should have perhaps had this story way up front in the news. But sometimes I do hold things later in the broadcast just to, so that those of you who watch regularly, you know that sometimes I put some of the most important stories right at the end. And, you know, that means you got to watch the whole program if you're really going to want to get the whole meat and nut of the thing sometimes. I've got a lighter story coming up next. It's out of China, a simple little story out of China in a way, but it's kind of thing that could happen anywhere. It does happen in the United States from time to time, and it's kind of story that people often find interesting, and we'll close with this one tonight. A manhunt is underway in China for 3 fugitives who broke out of a detention center in China, one of the provinces in China. The 3 men have been identified and their names have been given, and you'll hear them announced by Vicky Hurst in this video report.
This CCTV shows the moment 3 inmates walked out of a detention centre in northeastern China. They are seen wearing blue police uniforms as they exit the facility in Yanshu County. A huge manhunt was launched with over 500 armed police and more than 20 roadblocks surrounding the county. State media is reporting the men killed a guard before escaping, though they were unarmed when they left the centre. One of the fugitives is facing a death sentence, and the police have offered an award for any information which could lead to their capture.
That's it on that report, and that's it for tonight, friends, for this Wednesday night. God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again tomorrow night, Thursday night, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the COGTV.org video archive.